Make sure to check out all of our authors on social media. You can find links to their profiles in the description box. Make sure to follow so you don't miss any bookish updates. Hi, it is your host, Amy Prokopis. Hello, welcome back to our episode of Wednesdays with Writers. So I jumped in here because I have a couple important pieces of information about this episode. So Jenn and I actually spent probably 3 or 4 hours recording this episode, and shortly after we did our introductions, telling you a little bit about ourselves, the video stopped recording, unfortunately. So we were able to start recording again and get the episode that you will listen to shortly, but our introductions didn't make the cut. So what happened was completely my fault. We recorded the footage, and in order to record more footage, I had to move what we had first recorded, which was the introduction of this episode. And unfortunately, what I deleted, thinking was old footage, was actually the introduction that we had recorded. So unfortunately, I do not have the original introduction. The rest of our episode is intact though, so I thought that I would hop on here and introduce the two of us for the video, for our podcast episode. So you guys know me. My name is Amy Prokopis. I am an author of young adult books like The Arena, which is young adult science fiction, and my next book, young adult urban fantasy, called Guardians of the Sixth Gate, comes out October 31st on Halloween, just in time for spooky season. So that is me. My guest today, Jenn. You might know her from Jenn's Bookshelf, which is a YouTube channel here on YouTube. She's Jenn's Bookshelf, also across her social media platforms, and she posts about books. So she posts reviews, she talks about what she's reading at the moment, and she also is a writer. So Jenn is not yet published. She's currently querying a middle grade, and she has just written another high fantasy book, and she will tell us a little bit about that in this episode. But if you are curious to learn more about her stories and what she's working on, you can check out her on social media, especially her YouTube. Her YouTube is amazing. She does live writing sprints on the weekends, so you fellow writers like me may want to hop on and join her on Saturdays or Sundays when she does those. I'm usually there every week. And follow her on TikTok and Instagram, where she posts what she's reading at the moment and her thoughts on it. So Jenn was super kind to stick around with me throughout the technology issue, and we have a fantastic episode all for you guys, completely about reading and writing and everything in between. So I'm so sorry, guys, for some of the choppiness that might be this episode, but as always, thank you guys for listening. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Hello. Okay, that's much better. Oh my gosh. And we are recording. Oh, good. My Lord.
Good. Okay.
All right. So for everyone that is listening, what you will probably end up with, you will get the introduction from me, Amy Prokopis, your host of Wednesdays with Writers, but not always writers. We have talked with a ton of people. We've talked to some fellow readers. We've talked to a couple aspiring authors and some very established ones. And today we have Jenn, who you will know from YouTube.
Hello.
Woo! So Jenn and I already have had like an hour-long conversation, I think, all on our own about writing things. We've talked about like our writing styles, how I'm a bit of a mix of a pantser and a plotter. I've definitely gone more that way of plotting just because now that I'm publishing books, we talked about how like it's kind of messy if you are just like discovery writing all of the time. And then when things come to when you're like publishing and stuff, you have to be more mindful of your deadlines. Everything's a little more time sensitive, so it's kind of harder to discovery write as often, or at least without some parameters. That's where I'm a little different now, because like we talked about, I have an outline, but I sort of insert spaces within my outline for some discovery writing.
You have these checkpoints that you have to get to.
Yes. So you can't go so far off the rails. But
and I think I think we were in the middle of that discussion when our like recording died, and like everything, all the technology was just like, not today.
We've been through Zoom. We deleted storage on my computer, and now we've made it to StreamYard.
Yes. So if you knit together what you've already had and what we've already talked about, because it did record that, right?
Yes, you got that much. So
I think we were in the middle of that conversation about how, like, as writers in general, you get better and better at the craft, and that's why I think authors at some point in their career become comfortable with outlines, or at least some kind of an outline, just because you need that confinedness.
You need to hit your deadlines. You gotta have some kind of parameters in a timely manner.
And I think one of the things is when you're so like in it, and you're in the book world, and you're reading and you're writing all these stories, you become better and better at crafting a story. So you know what beats you have to hit, and you become a little bit better at like keeping your story trim and to the point. At least you should. I don't know if I am yet. Who's to say? But
you did say you're a bit of an overwriter.
Yes, I am.
You do get better at that as you go and stick with your outline. So we talked about my version of outlining a little bit. I've recently moved to the 7-point plot structure, and I put each point in a Google slide. That way I'm only seeing like one section at a time. It means that when I'm doing like info dump and starting to plot out like the finer details down to even like the chapters to a degree, my goodness, it's a little easier for my brain to comprehend just the one point versus where it fits in the whole thing. So what does outlining look like for you, Jen? I don't think we talked about that.
I don't think we
kind of went on tangents. But what is your method?
Tangent. So when I wrote in high school, I was more of a pantser. I just kind of let the story spill out of me. And that's why I never finished drafts ever. I think the first time I finished a draft was when I was in grade 12, and I was sitting on my couch at home, and I was like, I did it! And I felt so good. Like, that first time where I hit the end.
Oh my God.
It was an extremely long YA contemporary novel that has never seen the light of day and never will.
Everybody writes one of those. Everybody writes one.
For sure. But from there, my outlining kind of has morphed and is continuing to morph throughout my writing career, because I think it depends on the story for me. So when I read Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which is like my writing Bible, it opened up a world of like story structure and how every story, at least in Western culture, hits these beats, because we are very used to the 3-act structure. We are just naturally, that is how things are formed, especially movies and plays and TV shows and whatever. They follow that structure. In the Western culture, I should clarify, because I know
there are other structures in other places, and
so many, and like it's such a neat storytelling device to like realize that no, this is a very Westernized story structure that we work in, and that's what Western readers are used to and what they like. But I had Save the Cat, and for a long time that was like my Bible, the 15 beats. That was it. That was what I did. And like even my middle grade that I have currently on Query, it was plotted originally with the Save the Cat beat structure. And so like I would literally take each of those 15 beats and I would put them in a Word doc or a Scrivener doc or a Google Docs, whatever I was working on at the time. And then I would fill it in. I would just be like, okay, like what's my opening image? What's this? What's this? And go through. But I think now that I've done that the only other books that I've plotted since Project Dream, I think I did book 2 for Project Dream as well. And that was still in the Save the Cat structure. But that one I tried to do for Nano, and I didn't have an ending. I had an ending scene, but I didn't know like the
details
of the ending.
Yeah.
So I didn't end up finishing that draft when I was originally writing it for Nano. But that's fine. Like I hit the 50K and I was like, cool, that's fine. I won Nano. I just didn't finish this novel.
Just didn't finish the book.
Yeah, and I haven't looked at it since. But I will eventually when I go back to that middle grade project. But now that I'm in like a high fantasy situation with Project Dragon, I needed a different plotting system because it was my first multi-POV book. And it was a situation where like I know Save the Cat's like, well, you just take a beat sheet and you do a beat sheet for each person. And I'm like, that seems excessive. It seems excessive.
A lot of it would be quite, well, I guess not everything would be repeat details, but some of it would be.
A lot of it would be. And I think that's what made me realize that like some of the beats in the Save the Cat beat sheet didn't fit for all the stories that I wanted to tell and didn't really fit for the trajectories that I wanted. So I think that's why I was so stuck for a long time on Project Dragon.
Yeah.
Because it just like my head was like, I need to figure out these very rigid structures. But then when I was talking to Hannah Long, and then she ended up uploading a bunch of stories on Instagram about her outlining structure, because as a pantser turned plotter for the publishing industry, she has a system. And I was like, this system is so cool. And it's like broken down into a very loose format of, she has like, depending on what length of book she thinks it's going to be, a long or short, it's like 11 cue cards in each part of the novel. So it's like 3 parts, 11 cue cards in each. And then she's like, let's go, let's plot this. And it's just like the beats that she wants to hit herself, like the big story scenes that she knows are going to happen. That wasn't English. Nose is not a word. That she, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. The beats she knows that they have to be within the story somewhere.
Yep. I swear I'm an English major and I swear I'm an editor. The words don't work. The words don't work when they're coming out of my mouth. But once I saw that, my brain like exploded and I was like, great, let's go. So now I think my plotting is more along the lines of brainstorming like crazy within a, like, if I know the ending and I know what the trajectory is, beginning and ending, I can then sit and be like, okay, how do we get there? What are the big points? What are the big scenes? So I stole that idea from her, and I'm not as like rigidly as like 11 cue cards in action. I'm just like, okay, I split Project Dragon, for example, into the point of views for each folder.
Okay.
And then each folder, I have the cue cards in there. And then I just think about like, okay, what's Izzy's story? What is it top to bottom? And then I sit there and then I denote that into note cards. And sometimes I just have a Word doc open and I just brainstorm jot note scenes. And then I eventually put that into a structure and like organize it in a way. But yeah, I think that's what I did with Project Second Story as well. Because I know I was doing that challenge, right? So I knew.
Yeah, you needed you needed the beginning and ending there.
I needed every scene mapped out in my head because I was like, I don't have the time to sit and be like, what am I going to write next? No, I got to write 2,300 words a day. Like I need to know where I'm going. So that's kind of where my plotting is now. It's just a bunch of brainstorming and then sorting it, I guess, into like some kind of linear thing and then actually writing it. But I think that's what my first drafts are going to be.
Yeah.
I discovered over the past few years, like I have story stages, which are very interesting because I know a lot of people are like, oh, like I get an idea and I just run with it. I'm like, what about the incubation stage? Like, do you not just let it sit?
I have to let it play out in my brain, let it develop. And if it's still there in another month, then I do the pantsing part and I jump in.
Oh yeah. It's one of those things that like, I got to let it percolate. I got to let those ideas percolate. So I write them down because my brain, I have very terrible memory. So I actually have a Scrivener file on my computer where it is literally just ideas, and every new idea gets a new like folder or something, where then I'm just like, some of them are just one sentence where I'm just like, I want to dabble with this theme at one point in my life and leave it at that. Or I get a story hook, or I get a character idea, like just little things like that, and I write them down and I leave them. But after a time, like with Project Dragon, I had in my head my whole life, from the moment I watched How to Train Your Dragon, when I was babysitting this family, they had it on in the basement, and I was like, this is my favorite movie of all time. Suddenly, I see the light. Like, it's just like, this is it. From that moment, I'm like, I want to write a dragon story. So that idea of like, I want to write a dragon story where dragons aren't the bad guy, right? Because dragons are always the bad guy.
They're always a monster.
Especially in D&D, like they are the ones that you go out and fight. So I wanted to create this, in this world where dragons are usually fought, I wanted to create this space that they're safe. And that's where my Dragon Sanctuary came about. And then I read Hall of Smoke, and then I was like, what if they were in the mountains and they have a sanctuary for dragons and it's like Vikings? And then all of a sudden the idea just spilled out of me. So sometimes it just takes years for an idea to percolate.
No,
and then
wrong, yeah.
And then the brainstorming stage hits, and then the drafting, and then like the outlining stage, and then the drafting stage. And
I'd
then
agree.
Editing.
Oh gosh, there's always something.
Oh, it's never done. It's never done.
Yeah, you definitely want to write the story that you want to read, because you're going to read it forever and ever.
Exactly. And I want to read that story. And especially with Project Dragon, I keep going back to it, but it's
you do all the time, but I think it's because it's so interesting and there's so much to it.
It's the story of my soul. Like, I've written so many other things, and so many other stories have like called to me, but this one, it's going to break me, because it took me a year and a half to even be able to start writing the first words, right? Like it's an egg that I had to crack, and it is the story that gives me the most joy, and I love it. I love it so much, but it's in a fantasy world where Project Second Story is set as well. That I've run. It's all in the same world. It's all there, just in like different parts of the continent, and I've set D&D campaigns in that world as well. So it's really fun to play in it a lot, and get those different ideas and set things in separate areas that I might not necessarily know if I haven't written or discovered it yet, because I know the Nerian Empire so well, because that's where my Project Dragon is set, across the top northern part of it, and I'm just like, I know that continent so well. Everything below it, not at all. So we're just here.
That's for a future book. That's a future project.
Arrowmount which is where Project Second Story is set. It's on the coast in the south. It's like a southern coastal town, and it's so fun to dabble in this town that I've never been to before, but I'm here now.
Oh my gosh, writing is so much fun, and I think what we've definitely talked about, like we've talked about outlining structures, but we've also hinted a little bit at like how it's different depending on the story too. Yeah. And I think it's so hard to say that this is how I write a story, or this is how I write a book, because it's not necessarily the way I'll do it the next time.
Exactly. Which is why so many authors are out here going like, I got one book published and now I'm on to book 2 and I can't. I don't know how to start.
Yeah, it's hard again. So, it's hard again. It is its own adventure, and every book's a learning process.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Especially when you're like me, I'm dabbling in different age ranges.
Yes, and that's different too.
I have previously written YAs, and I now, as a reader, I'm falling out of love with YA, because I find teenagers absolutely insufferable.
See, I work with teenagers. They can be.
Yeah, they're all little assholes until they develop empathy. But like reading about a 16-year-old who's like found the love of their life, I'm like, no, you have not. You were 16. So I get a little bit pessimistic about them. But I know one day I do want to write YA, because YA sells.
Oh, I love YA. And it does. It does. It's a huge genre.
Yeah. And it's because it's so big, you can do so much in it.
You're right.
Like, I still feel like high fantasy still has a lot of like stigma or parameters around it. And even though it is my favorite, and I will always write in high fantasy. I think you have more freedom as a YA or middle grade writer because you can do so much and no one's going to question you about it. Like you can be like, all right, oh no, have I lost you?
Oh, that was strange.
I lost you for a hot second.
I know.
But what was I saying? You can do so much with middle grade. Like with middle grade, it's just like you don't need an explanation. The explanation can just be magic. Yes. No one knows. The kids aren't going to care. They're going to be like, we're in a world that magic explodes out of, I don't know, apples? Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
They'll take it and run. I think, high fantasy is the love of my life. And it's interesting. I do eventually want to write back in YA, probably if I find a love for it again one day, but middle grade and high fantasy are where it's at for me right now.
Maybe it's some of the books that like are really popular or current right now on Book Talk. I saw somebody posted a book talk that I just happened to see. I don't know who this person is at all. It was one of those that snuck in on the feed. And it said something about like, it used to be that in YA, the parents got killed off and you never heard about anyone's parents. Yeah. And now the parents stick around and cause problems for the protagonist. And I'm like, maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's why these teenagers sound so whiny, because we have to hear their parents' voice of reason next to them.
Maybe. I don't know.
I'm reading a lot of not young adult right now.
Yeah. And I think, especially with the trending social medias such as TikTok, there are trends for sure, no matter what. Like we had the dystopian era with the Hunger Games, right? Yes. When I was in, I think grade 6 is when it like kicked off, because grade 6 was the year that like all of us were reading Twilight. And even Baby Jenn at the time knew that Twilight was bullshit. So like she knew back then. She's like, this is bad. This is bad. Why is everybody reading this?
Right. But it still sells. So it goes to show that like it really is just about there's a book for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. So it did that. And then it was the Hunger Games. And then it was, all the stuff that came with the Hunger Games, the dystopian boom. And then we haven't really seen dystopian come back yet. Could be cool. I mean, it sort of did with like Scythe by Neil Shusterman.
Oh, yep.
It had a little bit of an up. But I don't think it's going to be as big as the Hunger Games boom was for many years still. But yeah, the trends are huge, especially on TikTok. Like right now, fantasy romance is where it's at, apparently. Yes. And I'm just like, why? What about high fantasy?
Yeah, I love high fantasy. I love high fantasy.
Like romance is fun, but like, sometimes it's useless. I want a plot. I don't care about this. If I wanted that, I would read a romance book. Like
that's true. I'm with you.
I still love.
Yes. Yeah. I know my Guardians of the Sixth Gate definitely has like a romance plot to it, but it's not so.
It's not the main
to the plot. Yeah, it's not the main overarching plot. It's like different. My female protagonist, she still has a whole lot of volition on her own. It's not all about her being in love with this boy.
See, that's good. That's good. When you have
they're like, different.
Yes, when you have the side plots that are romance and they they add to the story, that's all they do. They aren't like the shining aspect of it. They just kind of make you like more into the characters or whatever. You're more interested in like the relationships between like the friends and like whatever. And then there's like the big issue plot. That makes it more fun. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But goodness me, I don't even know what we were talking about before. We went on a tangent.
We were talking about like the different processes to writing those different books, and that's how we got into like the trends with TikTok and how those different shifts, how we went from like not high fantasy, we went from dystopian. Man, that felt like it was around forever.
It did. It was definitely there. Yeah, and then when all the movies were coming out,
so it kept
Divergent.
Going.
Yeah, the Divergent Life. God, I remember those books.
Man. Gosh, I still haven't read those. Maybe I'll get back around to them. I don't know.
I mean, Divergent, the first one.
Yes.
Not bad.
Yes.
I remember reading the third one and I think it was over Christmas. For some reason, I always read these books over Christmas. Like The Hunger Games, I binged over Christmas when I was a kid. And I only got halfway through Mockingjay, and then I threw it against the wall. So I never finished that when I was a kid. I did, I think, last year. Because I was like, I should probably finish Mockingjay.
Yeah.
I was just too mad about the whole Finnick and Primrose thing. Finnick, Primrose, and then the Gale thing. I was like, I'm mad. I don't want to read that. But I remember reading the third Divergent book in my aunt's basement over Christmas. And like, I was alone in the basement because I was that kid. And I was just like, I was tired of being around my family. I'm like, I'm going to go read. And then I was just sitting there sobbing on the pull-out couch.
I'll have to get back around to those. There's still so many books on the TBR. There always is.
Oh my God,
You're never going to clear that shelf out.
No. Yeah. That was the first time that I had ever been like betrayed by an author.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was one of those things where I came out of it and I was like, what do you mean authors can do this? I thought we had a deal. I think I even said that to one of my friends after I'd finished it. I was like, I thought there was a deal between the authors and the readers that you don't do stuff like this. And then since then, there have been many a time where the authors will do stuff like that. And like, it was the first time I was betrayed by an author, and opened my life to heartbreak through books.
Good Lord. So high fantasy is your favorite thing to write, right?
Yeah.
What about high fantasy do you like writing the most?
I think over the past couple of years, or even more than the past couple of years, because I remember when I started writing, it was always one of those things that I was like, oh, I could never write fantasy because my brain does not think of worlds like that. Mm-hmm. And now I'm here, and that is my favorite thing to do. World building is my favorite thing to do.
Oh, I love that part.
The idea of being so completely entrenched in another world has always appealed to me. Like, I like urban fantasy,
right? Yeah, it's total escape.
I love urban fantasy. My middle grade is urban fantasy. Mm-hmm. It's like portal fantasy almost, or like hidden world fantasy.
Yeah.
Is like what I loved as a kid, with like Harry Potter and with like Percy Jackson and any one of those. It's based in real life, but there's magic there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's like the magic itself. Like, what kind of worlds can you think up? You can think up anything with high fantasy.
There's so much to play with.
Oh God, yeah, exactly.
You set the rules. You set the parameters.
Yeah.
And what exists in that world, what their societies are like. That's so much.
Exactly.
I love those questions.
Yes. So I think that was like, once I got over myself and the fact that I was like, I can't write high fantasy. Yes, you can. If you put your mind to it, you're there. You're fine. You're fine. You're good. Once I got over myself and started writing fantasy, I think there's always a natural tendency for me in my writing to lean into the magical. Even when I was writing that YA contemporary back in grade 12, like there's a magic in there's a weird magic in YA books in general.
Yeah.
And I think that just came through, and it has leaked into actual physical magic in fantasy worlds now. And now that I play D&D,
it's all game
forever exist in fantasy, and that's all I want to ever do. There's a few ideas in my head that I'm like, if I ever decided to write romance one day or contemporary, that's what I would do. It would be like the touch of magic romances that are like,
I have some of those in mind too. Yeah.
Maybe one day, I don't know, but it's one of those things. What was I going to say? With the different categories of writing, or like things that you do, you're in the dystopian with the arena, right? And then Guardians of the Sixth Gate is more
urban fantasy. It's closer to what I tend to write. The arena is the first true sci-fi that I've ever written. It was sort of I did it when I think we all were looking for escapes during the pandemic. And that idea existed in a different form. And I had all this time all of a sudden, which was unheard of. What I was doing. Yeah, right. It's like, what? time. What is this thing? So I sat down and just I used it as an experiment to try something completely new. Didn't really plan on I didn't go in thinking I'm going to publish this book. And by the end of it, I thought, well, maybe we'll query it. And I started that process, and I thought, this is something totally new for me. I've learned a lot about like all these publishing things throughout the year. Maybe this is the good time to attempt self-publishing and see what I think about that, because at that time it was becoming a little more valid, and people were, especially the creative side of life during the pandemic, people were like the whole banana bread thing that was going on.
Oh my God. You remember the sourdough thing?
Yes. Everyone had a sourdough starter all of a sudden.
Incredible.
So I thought maybe it's perfect time to lean into that creative side and see what I can do on my own. And I learned so much I did so much research before I ever self-published, and I learned way more after the fact than I did like doing all that intensive research to how you actually go about self-publishing. I'm still learning. There's so much to it, but I kind of like the freedom. I didn't think I would like that marketing stuff, but I do a lot more than I thought. So I don't know if I'd go traditional. Maybe way down the line. There are some things that, there are some things to it that are super nice. Like you don't have to make every decision. That's
exactly. Nice. You're just the author. You don't have to be the author, the publisher, the marketer.
And you hand it off.
You hand it off to your editors. You don't have to be all of them. Yeah. I think that's like to our conversation about like the different, how writing different stories is. I have always like in my head wondered what I would do as a brand for an author if I did write and publish in multiple avenues, like YA or middle grade or high fantasy, like what I would do as the author. And I know, especially with high fantasy, traditionally publishing high fantasy and even indie publishing it, there's this stigma that men won't buy books written by women.
I know. That's stupid.
Bullshit.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Absolute bullshit.
It shouldn't make any difference.
No. And like, I know it's always kind of been a thing where like, even in like middle grades, like boys won't buy books written by women. I'm like, that's their parents 100%. Like, but it's one of those things that I was like, what would I do as an author to brand myself differently in those different avenues? Because authors like V.E. Schwab, she's done it. She's done it as like, she kept her young adult as Victoria and then her adult as V.E. Right. And I'm like, that's friggin' brilliant. So I'm just like, that's what I would do. Right. Is have my like younger readers have my full name, just Jenn Collignon. Right. And, or I think I even added in the middle initial just because it looks better.
Yeah, it looks really nice. There's just something like professional about having the whole thing there. I thought about doing that too.
I'm like, I like this. And then like for YA, if I ever wrote in that, I'd probably do the same or like slightly adjust it. Because I mean, the nickname Jenn and my last name don't really go well together, but the Jenna Collignon with the A in the middle looks so nice. But I think for high fantasy, it will always be J.A. and then my last name, just because then it can fly under the radar.
It'd be easier. It might be easier too. Yeah, I think it might be more separate. That is something that a lot of authors do, is because there are authors that have like pretty successfully written in different genres. But when you're writing for different readers, it is a little bit touchy because you don't accidentally want like your 12-year-old to suddenly get your high fantasy, maybe.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I think splitting the brands is really smart.
Yeah. And I think if I ever did like full romance, I would probably go pseudonym. I would probably do something with like the J and the C initials, but it would probably be like Jenn Collins or something, like just like more trendy, just to like attach a little bit. Because what if a middle grade reader was like, oh my God, I love this book by Jenna A. Collignon, I gotta find her other stuff. And then suddenly picks up this high fantasy that's like absolutely grim, dark, and brutal by the same author name and gets scarred for life. Like, some kids probably would be fine, but like in my head, I'm like, I gotta keep them separate, just branding wise. So
yeah, people have like expectations of authors sometimes. And if you veer too far from that, sometimes people stop reading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think
they read the wrong thing and then leave you a not the best review just because it's not their thing.
Yeah. Or they assume something about it and then they come in and it's not that, and then they get mad about it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many authors just in general, like even
I love all your bookshelves.
like one of my most recent purchases is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro or however you say it. And like it was advertised on Indigo, which is the Canadian book site, as a Canadian author. I was like, great. And in my head, I'm like, J.M. Miro 100% is a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
No. It's a man who wrote this. And I was very surprised when I opened it up and I was like, what? It's a he?
It's a he?
It's a he? Yeah.
Oh my God.
It doesn't even really say in this book. It's just like J.M. Miro writes and whatever is in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Ooh, don't fall. I have a stack of books next to me. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think the initials takes, it just adds a level of like a wall.
Yeah.
Which I almost want with high fantasy. I don't know why.
I think it works, especially for that genre. I think I'm interested now. I'm gonna have to go look through a bunch of like high fantasies because I wonder how many of them, their authors are written that way on the books. I wonder how many of them go by that.
We got H.M. Long, Hannah Long. We got J.M. Miro.
Yeah.
We got J.R.R. Tolkien.
I was gonna say we got Tolkien. Yeah. Maybe it's a thing. Maybe it's a common thing that no one's talked too much
really caught on to. I think it was a thing for women to do, just to like.
I think you're right too. Historically, yeah, I think that was kind of a thing for women.
Yeah, I think so. We got M.K. Jemisin up in the corner. You know, all of these things. It's always interesting to think about as a brand, especially as people on social media, like you and I are both.
Yeah, because that's such a presence now.
Yeah, I'm like,
consider that. Yeah,
I thought the other day, I was like, what if I turned my not my YouTube channel, because my YouTube channel is and always will be Jenn's Bookshelf. What if I changed my like TikTok and my Instagram to a more of an author program? And I'm like, but then how would people find me? Because it's the same name across everywhere, right? So it's I don't know. And I mean, it's more aligned with books on my social media. So, and not necessarily writing. Writing is like an afterthought on a lot of my social media. So I don't know, maybe one day it'll change it. But my personal Instagram is my full name. So I'm just like, I would have to change that then. And branding is always interesting.
Yeah. It really can make a huge impact though. Which is what you're talking about. Like you're talking about if you changed it too much, you might lose part of that Jenn's Bookshelf side of things as you go. I think there's a way that you could keep the two.
Oh, probably. Like I think about like Christine Riccio. Her YouTube is Pullman Banana Books. Right?
It still is, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think some of her her social medias are Xteen May.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I guess it would be fine if it's different around, but because it is the same now, I don't know. But yeah, I'm like thinking about it now, like thinking about other things that I can do as a content creator and as a writer with my social medias, especially with stuff like Patreon.
Oh my gosh. There's some cool things that some authors are doing with Patreon.
Like I'm following CL Polk, another one that goes by their initials.
Right? Yeah, the initials.
I'm following CL Polk and Hannah Long on Patreon, and CL Polk is putting out free writing advice constantly on their Patreon. And I'm just like, I am so excited to be here. And it's one of those things that I'm like, I know I want to eventually do a Patreon. Just
I think it'd be cool.
As like
a little community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you could do whatever you want with it. You could do meet and greet things like this.
Exactly.
Or
And
writing.
like I would have like it would be tied to my channel, so it would be have to be more book oriented and then probably some writing stuff, have like writing strengths and whatever. But in my head I was always like, once I hit 1,000 subscribers I will seriously consider it.
Mm-hmm.
I am 7 away
I
from
was gonna
1,000
say,
subscribers right now.
I saw
And
that post today. You are so
I'm so
close.
close. But
That's
the
amazing.
way that YouTube treats its creators is awful because
Yeah.
they have that like 1,000 subscribers threshold,
Yep.
but then you also have to have 4,000 hours of watch time in the past year. That's not possible at 1,000 subscribers, right?
Nope.
Like most people with 5,000 subscribers then hit that momentous day. And I think the only person that I've seen who have like hit the 1,000 subscribers hit the 1,000 subscribers count and then hit the watch hour count really quickly afterwards was Sarah Sutton.
Yes.
Because she runs so many live streams. And at the time, she was running like 9-hour live streams with people.
Yes.
And she was chatting with them through like Camp Nano. And she was doing this stuff like multiple times a week, doing all these live streams and also churning out content. And I'm just like, that's
a lot.
why. Because she's doing 9-hour live streams. Like that's why she's getting all these numbers. So I've been like trying to think of ways myself that I could like kick up the watch hour situation, because I've been watching my analytics on like YouTube Studio, and they have slowly gone up in May and June, which is nice because I've been hosting a weekly live stream.
You're live
and I do 2 videos a week, right? So I'm just like, the amount of content that you have to churn out before you can even hit the threshold of being paid, and it's like being paid like cents.
Yeah, you're not talking about a lot.
No.
Yeah.
So that's what Patreon is really appealing to me for. I just don't think I'd have a lot of people supporting me on Patreon right now, because I have like a small handful of subscribers who are religiously watching and commenting on my videos and like joining in live streams, right? And I'm like, okay, I have like maybe 10. And out of that number, maybe like 20% would follow me on Patreon. So it's one of those things that I'm just like, I'd have to really consider it before I did it. And it would have to be planned out really well, and I would have to have extra content and everything, because a lot of the big booktubers and author tubers are just going on Patreons now, and I'm just like,
that's true,
with like 50,000 subscribers, and I'm just like, oh, okay, so you're automatically getting hundreds of dollars. Almost knocked over my glass, just like thrown at you. So I don't know, it's one of those things that you always got to think about. And especially with the aspect of indie publishing, is you got to budget the hell out of that, right? It's expensive.
It is. And that's why so many, like Sarah Sutton's another good example. That's why so many indie authors are doing so many different things that all relate into their writing in some form. They're showing how it all, how the book's being produced and what all is going into that, because it's easy enough to add a camera to what they're already doing and then put it online. So there's so many different streams of income. It's not always just from books, and
it's wild.
Yeah. And there've been a couple that I love the indie author community. Some of them have been pretty transparent about that. They'll like, when they mention, well, this is what I make from, how much do you make a year as a full-time author? Well, here's what I make from books. This is like a fraction of everything I make though. So I'm a full-time author because I do this, and this, and that.
On top of it. Yeah. Exactly.
I don't know how they juggle it. It's so much work.
It's so much work. Like people always are out here, like people who are outside of creative communities.
Yes.
Like I don't know, my parents. People like my parents who do like regular manufacturing jobs. They look at the arts and the arts jobs with like, I don't know. My parents don't, because I am a person in the creative community, but
it's a
lot of people like that look at the creative community with such disdain. And they're like, oh, what do you do all day? Sit around? You're like, no, bitch, I work an 80-hour work week just content creating. Are you serious?
Yes, it is time consuming.
It's
I think
so
that's why it's such a slap in the face, the Amazon stuff right now that is being shared on TikTok. And that's like, people are sharing it more this week, especially because there's a petition that's really gained some traction, but trying to create some kind of legal precedent so that readers can't just download an ebook and then read it in a week and return it and get their money back, because that's essentially taking somebody's work for free.
And then the author pays for that through Amazon's programming, which
yes, they do.
Like, if you're going to do that, get the book through your library. God, it's not that hard. Every library has a little page that says, oh, I want to request this book for you to buy. And I have yet to have them say no. Like,
same. And you can get ebooks now.
You can get ebooks. You can get audiobooks.
You don't ever have to go to your library.
No. You just have it on your phone. It's great. Don't return books that you buy unless you absolutely hate them, and then it's valid going into the bookstore. Or if you're like me and accidentally buy 2 copies of things and you're
no.
Let me go do this. I have returned exactly 2 books in my entire lifetime, because it's one of those things that I'm like, I don't want to ever return a book. That feels so wrong. That feels wrong.
It feels almost like, I think of it the same way. It's not at all, but I think of it the same way as like ordering food and then deciding, oh, I don't want French fries. Take them back.
I think
no one wants your French fries.
I think once I bought my dad a book for Christmas, and he was like, no, like, it was weird circumstances. He ended up like returning a lot of things and getting whatever he wanted, because he's that kind of a person. But he was like, oh, you go return this. And whatever. And I looked at him, I'm like, what do you mean return a book? That's a thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the last time I've returned a book. You made me think about it. Now I'm like, have I returned a book? I don't know.
I think the closest I've come is canceling pre-orders.
Yeah.
Because like I pre-order so much at the beginning of the year, and then throughout the year, things will surface about the author, or I will lose interest in the book, or what have you. Like there's been recently, unfortunately, one of the pre-orders that I did receive, I found out after the fact, before I had even read the book, and I'm now outside of the return window, is that the author, like the content of the book is extremely racist and like really problematic. And I'm like, finding it out now. Okay. So like stuff like that, I will always go back and like stop my pre-orders and like cancel them or whatever. That's the closest I've come to returning books. Returning books feels wrong.
I know. Maybe that's part of that, is being in the creative sphere.
Maybe
there's always been that outside opinion that like creative endeavors are not, I even hesitate to say as valid as like other career options. But
oh my God, you're an English major. You're an English major. How many times did you get asked, why are you getting an English degree?
Oh yes. What are you going to do with that?
Are you going to be a teacher?
Yes. All right, so you're going to be a teacher? That was always the next question. It wasn't, what are you going to do? It's, oh, so you're going to be a teacher. Yeah. That's the only like digestible option there.
And like, sure, there aren't a whole lot of options as an English major, but funnily enough, there's a lot you can do with it. It just takes some time to find those bits, because we aren't told about it as like kids growing up. We're told about like 4 different major professions.
Like there's these industries, and they need 2 types of jobs. Yes.
Doctor, engineer, teacher.
Yep.
I don't even know what the 4th one would be.
Like, I don't even know.
It's those big things. Right.
Yeah.
And then they push you to science. And sure, science is great, but I've come across so many people in my lifetime who have been in STEM, and like all their university students who have like come across us in in different classes, like because you need to take other classes
Certain
to
amount of
graduate. You can't just take all English, which is sad.
Yeah.
But
I wish.
I took so many credit hours of English. Oh my God, it's ridiculous. But like you meet these people in other classes and they're like, oh, like, what are you doing for your degree? And when I was in university, the biggest thing that everyone was doing was going into business because like this generation, technically I'm Gen Z and I don't like it. I'm born in 97. I'm on the edge. I want to be a millennial, but I'm in the middle. But it's like everyone's trying to do their own thing, start up their own business and whatever. And it's just like you see these people and they're like, they immediately judge you for being an English major. They're like, oh, so what do you do all day? Read books? I'm like, yes, I do, because I love it. What do you do all day? Count numbers? Like,
right? You can boil anything down to those generalizations.
Exactly. And I remember sitting down with like family friends who their son is a couple years older than me, and he's in some sort of engineering that he went to a tech school for, so a college, which is what we call colleges in Canada. They're like more of the oh my God, I work with it every day.
Oh no.
It's gone. More of the
not
skills. The skills trade. There we go. It's a trade, right?
Yes.
Just have to run through all my jargon that I work with every day.
Oh my gosh.
It's more of a skills trade upbringing, whereas university you get diplomas and like become a doctor. So he was in like some sort of highly mathematical situation. And he was like, so he was talking to me about my university stuff and I was telling him what I was studying. And he was like, so you like write essays? And I'm like, yeah.
About things that don't seem to relate to what you're majoring in?
Yeah.
Like you're broadening your horizons.
You're writing essays about disability and Dracula. Like you're doing interesting stuff. And he's like, and you like that? I'm like, yeah. Why would I be studying it if I didn't like it? And then he made like an off comment of like, oh, like you got to be really good at singing or something if you want to be in the arts. And I'm like, what the hell does singing have to do with getting an English degree, my guy? Like they don't see it. They don't know.
It's about creative thinking. It's living in the gray areas. It's all, that's all it is. It's living in the gray areas. I could argue any kind of issue on either side because I have enough, broad knowledge that
this is why we make fantastic lawyers.
Yeah, you're not wrong. That's why English majors become lawyers. Yes, you're right.
Because
you
learn
all
the
learning the ways to
things
manipulate your information and
God.
That's what makes it. That's what makes writing so much fun. Is you come across these characters that are so different than you, and they do and make choices that you would never make, or questionable choices that fall in like that morally gray area, and you have to justify it or decide how you're going to juxtapose that.
Exactly, and you have to make everything
to read.
You have to make everything make sense. You can't just have a villain who is a villain for villainy sake.
Yeah, no one
like there's gotta be something there. And then you gotta make your villain sexy, because all villains are sexy. Like you just writing is so cool. Writing is all of the things. It's like I was having a conversation with my therapist the other day about how I've been able for the past decade to balance my life with also teaching piano on the side. And I explained it as like when I first started my editing job, I was working part-time. So I was there for 20 hours a week, and then I would go right from my editing job to my teaching job. And a lot of people were like, how are you not burnt out? And I'm like, because first of all, I was. Second of all, because editing and teaching are two different parts of my brain, right? And then I could still come home and I could still be creative and I could still write and I could still read, because I was using all these different avenues in my brain. And like the editing side of me is very analytical, and then the teaching side of me is completely different. So that's how I wasn't being so tired, because I was doing so much. Being a writer is so much like that, because you are doing everything. You are city planning. You are being a therapist to your characters and also putting them through the ringer.
That is true. And you still have to stick to those like we started with story structures. You still have to have some kind of structure that people are comfortable with. And
because even if you're writing just like character novels, when I was in high school, I hated character-driven novels because nothing happens, right?
They're not so plot. There's not like an action. It's just like emotion. Yeah.
Like most people are like, oh, like you can have a badly plotted book, but if the characters are great, you're fine. And I'm like, no,
not entirely. Yeah.
Not at all. I need the plot to make sense. And usually you need the plot and the world and the characters to work together for it to be actually a good story.
Yep.
So it's one of those things that like, I like some character novels, but I've read so many in my life that were just so boring because nothing happens. Like you need something.
Yeah.
You need something, which is hard as somebody who just wrote a cozy fantasy novel with low stakes. Because I was just like, I need there to be some stakes. There has to be something that gives my boys a little bit of tension. Gives the story a little bit of push. Otherwise, we're just standing in a bookshop, and like that would be fine for a short story, not for an entire novel, right? So it's interesting to do that. And I think as English majors, as people who thrive in creativity, even if you're not an English major, I knew a lot of math majors in university who took English as their minor, and they are authors too, right? Like it's people whose brains, there it is, work in a way. The words aren't writing. The words aren't working today. It's people whose brains.
Oh my good Lord. It is getting kind of late. We're going to wrap it up here in a little bit, but we've got to get at least through the thought, right?
We got to get through the thought. Whose brains work in a way that can see the whole picture, and who have studied books and stories and really how to tell a story. I don't know. It's so interesting to me. I took an indigenous literature class in my last year of university. It was one of my like graduate seminars. Because as undergraduates in my certain program, we had to take a couple graduate seminars as well to get our degree. It's a very specific degree that I took. But in that class, because indigenous storytelling is so different from the westernized storytelling, it was so interesting to see how that storytelling worked. And even in that class, we were introduced to very light indigenous storytelling. It was like The Marrow Thieves by Sherry DeMillan, which is a very popular YA novel, or it's a very good YA novel. I didn't love it because it's very YA, but it's good and it's well crafted. And then there's stuff like Tommy Green. What's his name? Thomas King. King, who wrote Green Grass Running Water.
There you go.
Which is a story that I really enjoyed. But the way that like narratives play in indigenous literature, it's very nonlinear. So it's having studied this kind of stuff and like seeing the way that structure goes together is so cool. And I think creative brains are just so neat. I was talking to a friend from university or from high school, and she is such a STEM brain, and she is like into sports and hockey, and I don't really know how we were friends, but we are. Like opposites attract, I guess. And like she doesn't understand how I can sit around and read as many books as I do in a year. And I'm just like, what do you do if you're not reading? Like what are you doing? Please tell me. Like,
where's the enjoyment? I always wonder that too. I'm like, what do you do for fun?
What do you do in your downtime?
Yeah. What do you do when you're not doing those things?
But those people are usually people who are always doing something, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Like in high school. In high school, Cass was always doing something. She was always coaching or playing or getting ready for games or doing dry land. She was always doing something, and she never had time to just sit. And I remember when the pandemic hit, she was texting me one day And she was like, I'm finally getting A's in university. And I was like, yes, what? Because she was always like a C kind of a student. And I'm just like, it's because you have time to actually devote to this stuff and like get into it. So I think a lot of those brain people who don't read or like who are like, the last book I picked up was in high school. Like that's not a good thing. You should read. Books are great. Like what do they do all day? They do all the things. They like in their downtime, they don't have downtime, right? Because they don't sit with their own brains and they don't like to sit and do stuff, or the only thing they'll sit and do is watch TV, which is fine. That's content.
Yeah, it's a different kind of storytelling too.
Exactly, which is good. If they didn't watch TV, I'd be very concerned. I'd be like, so like what really do you do all day? Do you just go to the gym for like 8 hours?
But reading is good for all kinds of things. It builds empathy and understanding for people that are unlike you.
Right.
It's so helpful. It changes the world.
It does.
Yeah. That sounds like such a high mountain we just climbed to. We're changing the world.
It truly, because if you look back at trends at like what books were really changing the world and becoming like making kids readers, right? It's huge. Like I know we don't want to talk about Harry Potter because the author is a piece of trash, but like you have those kind of books that were just so foundational to kids, and books change the world. They truly do. And it's just, it creates, I don't know, it just creates such empathy in people. Like seeing readers grow up and become wonderful people just makes me so happy. Like, it's like, I don't know. I like with my kids that I teach, I always say with my kids, I am 25. I don't actually have a biological child. I should clarify that. With my students, I see them, like I've had a couple for many, many years. And I've seen them grow up and become just wonderful people. And it's having that little bit of an influence in their lives as a teacher in a creative sphere is really cool. But also seeing them and then talking about books with them, because they all know that I read like crazy, because no matter what, I have a book with me. So it's seeing that aspect of them as well. And then getting some kids interested in books because we play the music to the movies in class.
Yeah. Oh, right? That's fun.
So it's just, books are the best. And like if I ever come across a kid who's like, I don't like reading, I'm like, why?
Oh yeah, yep.
Mm-hmm. Just why? Like explain it to me.
Let's find something for you.
And then I'm like, okay, pick up Harry Potter or pick up Percy Jackson. Pick up something like that where try it. Trust me. I know you probably don't like reading because your teacher's been forcing you to do it.
Yeah, you're reading things that are not maybe your cup of tea.
Or if they have learning disabilities. Because I know a couple of my kids, I can tell they're slow readers. And I'm like, I wonder if you have dyslexia or something. Like you have the hardest time putting together a word and you are at a grade level where you should be reading chapter books, right? So I'm just like, I wonder maybe if there is a learning disability there, which is fine, but
just a different way to, just something.
There's ways to make you love stories, even if you have a learning disability. Like that's what I love Percy Jackson for, because it's got kids with dyslexia and ADHD in it. And I'm like, you will see yourself in that.
I was just talking with a friend who started rereading it again. Yeah. I think I'm going to have to reread it and join her.
Because the world is hell, I started rereading it the other day, and I devoured The Lightning Thief in a day.
Oh, no.
And then
I'm going to have to do that.
Oh, man.
I think this is pretty much our time. We have spent, because of all of our technology issues and everything.
It's been like 2 hours.
It's been a very long time, and we have been chatting the whole time. So I promise you that we could probably talk forever about these same issues.
Oh my
God. Just so this isn't a 3-4 hour long episode, I think this is where we're going to leave it. I'm sure that you and I will have more conversations in the future.
Oh my God, yeah.
Oh yeah, we definitely have to, because we have so many different things in common, and we only touch the surface. So, but
so good.
For this episode of Wednesdays with Writers, that is it. I'll make sure, and I will include all of Jenn's social medias in the description box on YouTube. I'll also be putting out a TikTok that'll go all over the place, so share that as you see it too. And thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. I forget how much I love talking about this kind of stuff until I do actually sit down and talk about it.
I've learned so much from
5 hours later.
I've learned so much from the series. Like I said, I've talked with people who are debut authors like me, people who just read a lot of books, like English majors like us. And I've also interviewed a couple established authors. In getting all those different perspectives, one, it's taught me that there really is no right way to do this. Everybody's book is going to look different. There's a story for every person. Everyone's process is different, but it's shown me, it makes me feel really positive about like growth and publishing more books and just feeling connected. It makes me feel like I have coworkers and such. So
yeah, because a lot
of joining me. This has been really fun.
Yeah, a lot of the publishing industry feels like it's such like dog eat dog. Everyone's like rival, and I'm like, no, it's the book world. We all love each other.
Yeah, right. Like your readers might be the same readers that I have, and they may not be. They might be totally different people. That's fine, but they're all reading. They devour books like crazy. I mean, that's all book talk is how many books do you have on your TBR? I have 20.
I have over 100.
You do. I've seen you had a whole video, like a 20-minute video of here's all my books. So
here's all my books that I have yet to read, and it's probably over 100 and 110. I think it's at right now. I don't know.
Gosh.